After 4 years, John Wick is back.
I'm thinking I'm back.
And this franchise has come a long way from where it started. So let's talk about it. Honestly, one of my biggest takeaways from this movie is that apparently everyone in the world of John Wick either is an assassin, works at a hotel, or spends all of their time at high-end raves where shootouts happen so often that people keep dancing while heads are exploding right next to them. Real quick, join me down below in the comments section. Let me know your thoughts on the John Wick franchise as a whole. Do you love it? Do you hate it? Are you somewhere in the middle? Got one quick announcement before we get started. I've got 2 live events coming up over the next 2 weekends. This weekend, I'm going to be at Fan Expo Cleveland with Austin Burke and John Flickinger leading some panels. The weekend after that, I'm going to be at MegaCon in Orlando with Cody Leach, Austin Burke, John Flickinger, as well as Cris Parker, 3C Films, and also on our stage will be Jandreau as well as Perri Nermiroff. If you love the movie YouTube space, you have got to come out to Orlando, Florida for MegaCon if you're able to. With that said, let's get started with the good.
And so it begins.
And the John Wick franchise, just like John Wick himself, does not miss. This movie once again solidifies that this is the premium Hollywood action franchise of the last decade. All of the films have great characters, fantastic world building, and actual top-notch distinct action. And this movie continues that trend with more great characters. The world is bigger than ever, and this movie is jam-packed with action sequences that are actually wow-inducing. And since this is the premium action franchise, let's start there. And normally with action movies, the set pieces get bigger as the movie goes along, and so in the 3rd act of John Wick Chapter 3, you have this massive shootout at the Continental. This movie starts off at that scope and size. That's the first one, and then it crescendos from there. So it picks up with the massiveness of the 3rd film and only gets bigger and crazier. But with each of the big set pieces, it picks a different location to make it look different, to shoot it different, and have different opportunities for how John Wick and other characters kill people, as well as just the different vibe of the choreography in each of these sets. So like right out of the gate in the first one, it's huge in size, but it finds all these little moments to pause and have like John Wick pick up nunchucks. In which case you see that and you go, oh, this is gonna be awesome. And it is just as awesome as you would expect. But part of what makes the John Wick movies so cool is that they always have layers to what's going on in the set pieces. It's not just John Wick fighting one person, it's John Wick fighting this person in front of him while trying to hold off 2 or 3 people behind him. So there's always layers to the choreography. There's this guy that he's killing, and these 2 guys that he's holding off, and then he goes and finishes them off. So there's multiple things to look at and be intrigued by in the choreography, and each of the things he's doing is interesting and cool, but there's several of them happening all at the same time. And like I said, it starts off at that level right there and only gets bigger. So when you get to the 3rd act of this film, it's like this 40-minute long action set piece that keeps changing locations, and everywhere that he goes, it comes up with something new and interesting where you're like, I do not know how they shot that. And it changes the way that the sequence is filmed. Part of it is in traffic, part of it involves people being set on fire with these long takes where someone's just laying there on the ground on fire and you're going, you can't set a person on fire and leave them there for that long. And so the whole thing just keeps finding new creative things to do with John Wick to use his particular set of skills, all the while having true movie magic. Well, it's probably not real magic, but it feels that way because you don't know where the stunt work ends and the VFX begin. The takes are all long, wide shots, so you can see everything taking place, and dangerous things are happening. People hitting with cars, people set on fire, people falling downstairs, people falling from very high spaces, but there's no cuts. and they interact with something on the front end and the back end, so you don't see where any effect could take place. It's seamless. And that right there is what makes these movies special and stand out. We see so many CGI spectacle films where you just know you're watching your favorite Marvel character on a green screen surrounded by CGI characters and effects. When you're watching this, you know Keanu Reeves is doing something, doing real stunt work, but you don't know how the cars are doing what they're doing. You don't know how people are being set on fire. You don't know how this shot is so long, how they're doing these camera shots that are up close and then it goes up high and it's like a drone shots in the middle of this long take where so much stuff is happening. You're actually wowed by action again, and we don't get that nearly enough. And this movie takes all the wow factors of the previous John Wick films and just takes it to this whole other level while looking gorgeous and having new ways to do fights, do camera work, all of it. All of it is fresh, different, and new. But you don't just want non-stop action set pieces, you need a story that ties it all together. And I would say that this is the most focused story since the original film. Now, it is a very long movie. It's 2 hours and 50 minutes, and so there's a lot in there, but it's always clear what we're trying to do. Very early on in the film, it establishes our new villain and gives us a reason to hate him. It gives a reason for why all of these other characters would start to side with John Wick and what he's trying to do. And whenever you go into a set piece, there's a clear objective. There's a clear thing that our characters are trying to accomplish, whether it's the villains trying to kill John Wick or John Wick trying to kill someone, whatever, or trying to get to a place by a specific time. You always know exactly what they're trying to do and why it ties into the story as a whole, so it has more meaning to it. And the little choices that side characters make all along the way, you care about it because it ties into what's going on. They find a way to give it a little bit of a personal, emotional stake as well. Not as strong as the original film. The original film will always have the strongest emotional hook of, you killed John Wick's dog that his dying wife gave him, and you took his car. You're not gonna be able to beat that emotional, pure hook of that, but it finds other things to throw in here that immediately make the audience invested in seeing the main bad guy defeated. And so it just gives us an actual target for what we're working towards as we go throughout the entire movie. And it has a definitive ending because of that. Parts 2 and 3, especially 3, felt like it cheated the ending and just kind of moved the goalpost. You get to the end of the film, the credits start rolling, but you're like, wait, we didn't really accomplish anything. Nothing's really changed in the course of this entire film. This movie, because it gives us these objectives and goals, you can come to a satisfying conclusion and be like, there, right, cool. We had a beginning, a middle, and an end, and a satisfying conclusion to the story that was being told in this film. And I alluded to this while talking about the story, but once again, you get a bunch of memorable characters. And of course, we have our surviving members from the previous few films returning here. And so, of course, John Wick is a legend as the action hero. Winston is always fun as the manager of the Continental, who's always has his own best interest in mind, but also is loyal to the people around him in his own ways. And given the choices that he made in the previous film, puts him in an interesting position when it comes to John. But then we add in a bunch of great new characters. Our villain, played by Pennywise himself, is just perfectly arrogant and is kind of the face of the table and what they represent. And so it gives you a target of like your anger towards the table and the way that he behaves. They let him make choices that make the characters and audience angry with him, but he stays consistent within that maniacal nature of what he's doing, where you understand his ambitions that are driving him to do what he does, but it never tries to like soften any of it. You just don't like him. At the same time, our kind of muscle in this film, the blind man played by Donnie Yen, they kind of use him as a bit of a mirror for John Wick, of showing these characters that are stuck in this world, having to do things that they don't necessarily want to do. They have this incredible set of skills and people that have leverage over them. And so they're always kind of like, you're so mad at him, but you also are fascinated by him. They come up with ways to make how a blind man can fight and be effective in what he's doing. Even the way that he moves is different in light of the fact that he can't see, but he's also Donnie Yen, so he's incredibly fast, agile, and can do cool flippy kick thingies. Of kind of our final henchmen in the whole franchise, the blind man, Donnie Yen's character, is by far the best of these kind of final henchmen guys that we've ever had, that has kind of a fleshed out backstory of what's driving him to do what he's doing. He has connections to other characters and just makes him fascinating. But the whole movie is just populated by these interesting side characters that just kind of pop up all throughout the whole film. Scott Adkins is in this movie as a totally unrecognizable gangster in the story, and used to good effect. Once again, memorable, and you get to see Scott Adkins do his usual bag of tricks as best he can in the makeup that they have him in. Final thing to talk about here is that the movie is actually paced pretty nicely. It's too long, we'll get into that later on, but even given its length, you don't get bored. While in my theater, I don't remember anyone in the middle of the film getting up to go to the bathroom or anything like that. It was a packed, there was a ton of people in this theater, and everyone stayed in there all the way up until the very end of the film. And so despite probably being too long, we'll talk about that, it doesn't drag, it paces itself nicely. So you get more just phenomenal top-notch action, which is creating new tech and new stunt work, new things that can be done in the action genre. Like, it is actually pushing the genre forward while having a more focused story like the first film, with all the world building that you love, without getting lost in it like the third movie did just a little bit. And so a great addition to the franchise. There's a few more things to talk about here, so let's move on to the mixed aspects of the film. And the first thing that comes to mind here is that this movie makes the third movie feel kind of pointless. Like, you could almost skip part 2 and go straight to part 4, and you're not missing a whole lot. I mean, there's little references to things that happened, but it feels like what part 4 is what part 3 should have been. And that's not necessarily negative for this film, but it is kind of a negative for the franchise as a whole, because it makes one of the other movies just feel like they didn't know what they were doing quite yet with the third film and where to take things after part 2. And so part 3 is just kind of them spinning their wheels. And so this one kind of rehashes 3 in certain ways, but a much better version of the story that actually progresses things forward. Other thing to discuss here in the mixed section, once again, this isn't a good or bad thing, just something you need to know. There is a post-credit scene. After all the credits, there's a little tag at the end. It does tie into a plot point. It is something, it's short, it's not a whole lot, but it is something worth sticking around for to see kind of a bit of a follow-up on something. From there, let's move on to the bad. The first thing that kind of comes to mind here is that John Wick can feel like a side character in his own movie. I think there's like 4 or 5 characters in this film that have a lot more dialogue than John Wick. And they discuss what's happening. We learn about their backstories, what's kind of going on in them. And then John Wick shows up for the action set pieces. He goes wherever he needs to go. But the dialogue is driven by Winston, the Marquis, the blind man. All these other characters are just chatty, talking all the time. And then just John Wick kind of like shows up to shoot people in the face, break their arms, throw them into cars, and throw them off of buildings and snap their bones. And so it was a little bit odd the way that he felt kind of distant from the story, while other characters were a little bit more front and center. Other gigantic thing here is that the movie is very over the top. There's 1,000 things in this movie that should have killed John Wick, and then he just gets up and keeps on going. And so your enjoyment of this film will probably be directly tied to the amount of fun that you can derive from watching John Wick in God mode. This has always been true of this franchise. Like, of course, no one can survive all this stuff. This one takes it to this whole other level, especially as you're in the last hour of the film, and he is just getting hit by cars, bullets, falling, rolling down things. So much stuff happens to him, and then he gets back up and he keeps going. If that's gonna bother you, it's probably really gonna bother you in this film, because it gets pretty wild. If you can just accept that John Wick can survive an insane amount of stuff this one, you're seeing awesome John Wick stuff, but you just have to accept that John Wick gets the crap kicked out of him 1,000 different ways throughout this movie. Final thing on here, the movie doesn't need to be 3 hours long. It is telling a very large story with a lot of characters. It is trying to close things out while following up on everything. There was a lingering plot thread. But the original movie was 1 hour and 40 minutes. This is 1 hour and 10 minutes longer than the original film. It's almost twice as long as the original film, and it just didn't really need to be. Now, back in 2020, the CEO of Lionsgate announced that they were writing and shooting John Wick 4 and 5 back to back. And so that was the original development phase of this film, was we're doing 2 movies, jump forward 6 months, and they decided to condense it into just 1 film. And you watch this movie, and that's kind of what this feels like, that they had this much stuff. They brainstormed this many ideas, this many characters, and then they squished it into a 3-hour movie instead of trimming some side characters, trimming some subplots, and focusing things a little bit more. They just went, let's throw everything in there. Like, in particular, there's this side character who's a tracker that has a dog. He's a cool character. I don't dislike the character. I don't have any issues with the character himself, but he doesn't serve a specific purpose in this film besides being a cool character. He's just one more complication, but there's no shortage of complications and conflicts in the movie already, in which case we're spending 20, 30 minutes of screen time making scenes a little bit longer, a little bit more action, his dog doing stuff because he's in the film that doesn't actually benefit it on this any other new level. It's just one more thing thrown in there. And there's just a lot of things like that of, it's not that they're bad, they just threw so much stuff in here that the movie kind of gets to this unwieldy length of nearly 3 hours long for what is kind of a fairly straightforward setup for an action movie. And if they're trying to like end with a bang and they went, let's just throw everything in there, let's do our grandiose film, let's do our the good, the bad, and the ugly. Hey, fair enough. I'm not mad at you for it, but 3-hour movies are just exhausting. And I don't know that this movie was more effective by being 30 minutes longer than it needed to be, just so we could throw every single idea in there. But all that's to say, it's not the masterpiece some people are claiming that it is, but it's almost certainly going to be the best action movie of 2023. It has cutting edge action, it has great characters, it has awesome world building, and it has a focused story with a satisfying conclusion. If you like action movies, if you like John Wick films, you must go see this film. Overall, I'll give it an A-, but on the entertainment scale, a 9 out of 10, and this is a must-see for action fans. It delivers everything you want from an action film. Remember, I'm gonna be at Fan Expo Cleveland and MegaCon over the next couple weekends. Details are in the description, and keep talking movies and TV too much. Bye-bye.